The meeting is called back to order at 7 p.m. We'll ask the district clerk to lead us in the pledge. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, may I have a motion and a second that the agenda of December 12th, 2017 be approved as submitted? Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed. Thank you. May I have a motion and a second that the board approve the following consent agenda? Approval of the minutes of November 28, 2017 is submitted. Acceptance of recommendations from the Committee on Special Education. Acceptance of recommendations from the Committee on Preschool Special Education. And acceptance of recommendations from the Superintendent for Personnel Changes.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed. Thank you. All right, we have our attached treasurer's report for the month ending October 31st, 2017. May I have a motion and a second that the treasurer's report, including the cash report, general fund cash report, the general fund revenue status report, general fund budget status report, school lunch fund cash report, and school lunch fund revenue and expense budget report for the month ending October 31st, 2017 be approved?
So moved. Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed. Thank you. All right. Special reports.
We have one special report tonight. We have Miss Marty Morrow with us, and she's coming on up to talk about Medicaid compliance plan. It's the recertification. It's our annual Medicaid recertification discussion. I'll turn it over to Marty. You got to click her over there for the PowerPoint.
Hi, how you doing? I am the Medicaid coordinator for Penfield. Let's see if we can get this up. And I want to thank you for allowing me to come and provide training on the School Supportive Health Services Program, otherwise known as Medicaid in Education. This is a state-approved program that accesses Medicaid funds to assist schools with providing services to students who are Medicaid eligible. There are very specific guidelines in place to prevent fraud or abuse of the program. All services and billing procedures have to comply with federal and state guidelines. Our Medicaid Compliance Committee includes Barbara Gregory, the Medicaid Compliance Officer, Scott Dreschler, Bill Maloney, and myself. And we meet periodically to review alerts, establish best practice and procedures, and review our compliance plan. Anyone who suspects waste, fraud, or abuse is obligated to report it. These concerns may be reported to Barbara via email, phone, or letter, and also to the Office of Medicaid Inspector General. There are 10 services that are covered under this program. In Penfield, we bill for speech-language therapy, physical therapy, and occupational therapy. We've made attempts to bill for other services. Unfortunately, the guidelines were designed better for doctors' offices than for school districts, so we choose to avoid excessive data tracking requirements and cut back to these 3 services. The first requirement is to obtain a one-time written consent from the parents. We've made a conscious effort to collect these consents. Some people have the misunderstanding that if a school district bills for these services, the student won't be able to benefit from other services, but that is not so. They have a different order written to cover those expenses, so they will not impact the other. OPRA is a quick application which service providers fill out to describe their intent to comply with the guidelines of the program. The providers must be certified and licensed and have a national provider identifier number. There are qualified individuals with lesser credentials who may work under the direction of a licensed and certified provider. But the agencies where our students are placed all manage these documents for their providers and keep us informed of their renewal status, and we keep track of our internal providers. The NPI number is a number that is used by HIPAA entities, and it maintains privacy for the healthcare providers, and also provides a national database of providers so that we can keep track of who's up to date and what therapy they're providing service for. There is a federal exclusion list, and this is to keep up with anyone who might have abused the process or has been charged with fraud. Any provider that is on the list we can't bill for their service. So we have to go through it when we hire new people, make sure they're not on that list, and also from time to time check it to be sure no one that is involved with our students is on that list. These are all different types of issues that might prevent claims from being billable. And fortunately, we have a system that also checks all those things. So we have a lot of different eyes on it, and we keep track and make sure that none of those problems get put through the system. This year, we did change our billing service bureau. So we're using Frontline Education, and that occurred effective 7/1. It allowed us to streamline our processes so that all our special educators are using just one system, and all our agencies are just using one system. Once we definitely made a decision to go with this, we halted some of the inefficient processes that were in place, and so we did have a little time that we had to catch up on that. And also at the same time, New York State changed their Medicaid eligibility service, so we have to go through a different channel now to determine who's eligible and who's not. So these are all little changes that have occurred this year, but we're all underway and in motion, and seems to be working well. That's about all I have to give you for updates. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you. Yeah,
Yes.
Barb.
Okay, so as the former or retired speech language pathologist to subs, what are the guidelines for speech people here in the district for the Medicaid notes?
They have to have, you would have to have all your documents in with me. I would meet with you and go over the requirements and make sure that I have your license, that you have the NPI application processed, that you are enrolled in the OPRA program. And as long as your records are up to date, we have to know that you're not on that exclusion list. We'd have to check that, and then that's all good to go.
I just have one other question. So as a sub then, because you're now doing IEP Direct versus when you were doing Kinney before.
Right.
So as the sub, would you create an IEP Direct account for myself?
You would have to, because any notes that you do, that's your note.
Okay.
So you would have to maintain compliance on those notes and the services you provide.
And the other piece that, just for explanation, contemporaneous notes means what to everybody?
So this year, we extended that to 72 hours.
Okay.
So basically what it means is that within 72 hours of providing a service, you need to put your note into the system.
So that's very nice that you've got that 72
Yeah.
hours, because when I was working, you had to do it within 48 hours, and if it was a Friday,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's why we decided to extend it. There was one other thing that we had to do this year. Because of the fact that the system for determining eligibility changed, we have to go through a very different process. And so we're taking notes on all students, not just on students who we know are eligible. So
Every day that they have received service?
any student that gets a service has a note in the system.
Okay. So here's my next question. Do your support staff then have time in their daily schedule to write their notes?
It's been going really well. I think that they're surprised at how smooth of a transition it's been.
Okay.
We have met, and we've been trying to stay on top of any questions that they have. But this system, Medicaid Direct, has been used by all the other districts in the area, so they've really tweaked it to meet the needs of the providers.
Okay.
So it's pretty streamlined.
Okay.
Barb, there is time built into all of the speech language teachers' schedule every day, or if not every day, every other day, so that they do have time to work on their
Okay.
notes.
Yeah. Thank you, Barb. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Does the compliance committee, in order to identify best practices, do you bring in maybe one of the auditors? Or where do you come up with the best practice?
We've had auditors come in. We have done internal audits. But Cindy from BOCES comes in and makes sure that we know what documents are needed and tries to help us make sure our filing is all up to date. So,
Thanks.
Any other questions? I have a quick one, Marty. When you say there's a lot of glitches that can interfere with getting a reimbursement, so if something like that does happen, are you awarded an opportunity to correct that and get the reimbursement? Or if the mistake is made, do we lose the reimbursement?
typically it's moving forward. When you find a mistake, you would let someone know that, oh, this is what you're doing wrong, and you need to correct that action. There's times when they'll know that they entered something wrong, and they have the ability to invalidate that no and then
Okay.
re-enter it.
Oh, I see. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, Barb, one more?
Well, to go along with that, if you've got now 72 hours to correct something, that's huge versus when you had to have it
That's
within
true,
48 hours. So
right.
that certainly is a help to the district to correct things.
Very good. Thank you, Marty. Appreciate you coming out tonight.
Have a good holiday.
Okay. All right. This would normally be visitor speaking time. No visitors? All right, we'll move on to Claire.
Thank you. So for the past 2 weeks, over the past 2 weeks, students from all over the district attended the annual SEPTA Book Fair, and whether it was performing in music groups or showcasing their art or listening into stories and getting author signatures. At Harris Hill, a few fifth grade students have volunteered to be library helpers, or they help the Harris Hill librarians with straightening books and taking care of the renovated library. Also, Harris Hill fifth graders put on their long-awaited musical, The Wizard of Oz, and before the show, the Harris Hill cast met the Broadway star Cara Lindsay. At Cobble, students are preparing for the winter concert on the 14th by rehearsing with their musical groups. And in Indian Landing, representatives from Brownie Troop 60011 took action by hanging handmade signs and making a public service announcement on the morning news about conserving water. On the 3rd, student representatives from Indian Landing also participated in the Girls on the Run 5K. And students are collecting donations and non-perishable food items for Indian Landing's Holiday Helping Hands initiative. At Scribner, 4th grade students made 117 sets of scarves and winter hats for students at school number 33. and fifth graders met with the Penfield Director of Food Services and Education Solutions representative at Waste Management to discuss increased recycling ideas, showing that Scribner students are staying earth conscious. And Scribner delivered 150 winter coats, 48 pairs of winter boots, and 38 snow pants to Cameron Community Ministries through generous student donations. And at Penfield High School, Kevin Hines delivered another powerful presentation about suicide awareness to Penfield on November 27th for parents and students. And after Thanksgiving break, Sources of Strength students led a school-wide activity to which students wrote what they were thankful for on Post-it notes and stuck them on teachers' doors. And this past Saturday, the PHS Patriots Supporting Patriots Club held a community bottle drive where money was raised to go to the New York Warrior Alliance, a local group that supports wounded veterans.
Nice. Thank you, Claire. Any questions or comments for Claire? I think most of us got over to SEPTA. I don't know. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. There was a lot of activity. A lot of moving parts there. Barb.
Well, the superintendent got to interview Susan B. Anthony. I was there for
yes.
that.
I had a great time. I'm moving up. My first year, I got to interview service dogs, and I slowly moved up to Susan B. Anthony. So she did a wonderful job.
Can't wait till
Students were great. So
That's wonderful.
I did go to 7 banks over 2 days to try to find Susan B. Anthony dollars that I could hand out. And you can't order them at the bank anymore. You got to be
No.
lucky when you walk in.
Oh, really?
So I wasn't
Oh.
lucky.
Oh,
I think I have a couple.
well. Well, thank you, Claire. All right, superintendent's reports.
Okay, this evening, I just have a couple of student staff honors, and then we will invite Dr. Maloney and Mrs. Dana up to give an overview of the course description guide for high school course selection. That's, believe it or not, going to start up pretty soon for the 2018-19 school year. And I'll turn over to Dr. Sansucci, who will walk us through the Elementary Additions Project update, one of the last we'll really get because we're heading towards a vote in February. And then also we're in the budget season, and so this is the time of year where Dr. Sansucci will walk us through the budget forecast and our reserves plan for the 2018-19 school year. Harris Hill students collected a little over $300 in donations for the Parrington VFW Post to help restore the memorial statue that was recently vandalized in Fairport. I think a great, both a partnership with another town that's near us, and I know that hit the news and people were very upset, and our elementary students came to Mr. Nelson with the idea of wanting to help replace that. And so they collected funds, and what a great opportunity to give back to the community right near us. We have a lot of really exciting all Greater Rochester athletes, and so just a congratulations to the high school students being named all Greater Rochester athletes for the fall season. Cross country, Cameron McKenzie and Tyler Sinal. Field hockey, Jessica Rainier. Girls swimming, Serafina Viola and Tony Nacarelli. I mispronounced her name, I apologize. Girls tennis, Caitlin Hogan and Abby Guyan. Boys volleyball, Jordan Hildreth, Jet Clintworth, and Josh Cohn. And girls volleyball, Beth Lawatch and Sarah Green. And congratulations as well to one of our very own Scribner PE teacher and boys volleyball coach, Mike Fusar, who was named Coach of the Year for his work with boys volleyball. So great celebrations in the world of athletics for Penfield. Those are my only 2 updates, because I realize I can never beat Claire. She always has wonderful updates on everything happening K-12 through the district. So thank you, Claire. And I'll turn it over now to Dr. Maloney and Mrs. Dana.
So it's hard to believe that it's already time to talk about the 2018-19 course selection guide. But as Dr. Putnam mentioned, we're heading into budget season, and the course selection guide, as Liz Smith, the department chair for social studies, says, students vote with their feet in the courses that they select. So the course selection guide, if you've had a chance to take a look, it has a new look to it. Mrs. Punzi in the art department designed a new cover for it using student artwork, and I'm so excited about how the new guide looks. And then on the inside, there are some new features as well that Mrs. Dana is going to highlight.
We are really excited. We changed the format of the book. It's one of those projects we always want to work on, but never seem to find the time. And I have to give kudos to some of our secretaries in the counseling office who are phenomenal. We've redesigned the book and to make it more searchable and to make it more user-friendly. In the past, you couldn't hit links, you couldn't jump from page to page. All of the pages at the bottom of every page, you can click back to the table of contents, which is now hyperlinked and jumps you to any section of the course selection guide. So we really hope for our students that will be easier to use, as well as parents. We also really took a look at four-year planning, and as we thought about new courses we were going to offer, how were we going to offer those classes without increasing staff? So we went to an every other year rotation on a few of our classes that don't always have a lot of enrollment. So students now, and I apologize that we don't have a slide, can see there's 5 classes that we are going to offer every other year. So for the next 4 years, the kids can look in the course selection guide and see AP Art History will be offered next year, but it won't be offered the following year, but then it will be back in the rotation. And some of our technology and business classes will be running like that, so we can make sure that our classes are full and that we're not running classes with low enrollment while also introducing new classes. Other parts of the course selection guide, all of our dual credit options have a logo. It's the gray and white arrows up above. And we're now at, I believe, 31 of our classes do offer some type of college credit with them. We have partnerships with MCC, Syracuse, and RIT. And it's just a great opportunity if families want to pursue dual credit while in high school. Oftentimes we hear of some of our graduates completing college in 3 years just because of the number of dual credit courses that we do offer. A lot of times kids will ask, will it transfer to college? And that is dependent on the college they attend, but if they stay within SUNY, all of those credits will absolutely transfer. We currently offer 16 AP courses in addition to the 31 dual credit options.
And as always, there's some new courses to share with you. These would be pending board approval. The first course is a Microsoft Office course, and a number of districts in our Monroe 1 BOCES offer either this course or there's also an advanced course. And we've struggled having only one business teacher. Now that we have 2 business teachers, and we're going to that rotating every other year model, we're excited to be able to offer the Microsoft Office course. Students will be skilled in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Access, and it's also a dual credit course through MCC. The Mosaics Literature of Diversity course, this one I'm really excited about. The students who have been participating in the Student Summit on Race over the past few years, we've worked closely with Greece on a couple of projects, in particular planning the Student Summit on Race that we hosted here. And in that planning, we visited Greece a couple of times, and the students who worked on the Greece end were in a Mosaics club. And so our students started asking questions and learning more about their Mosaics club. And as our students learned about the Greece Mosaics club, they said, please, please, can we have a Mosaics club? And so this year, at the end of last year, we put the pieces together, and then this year we've rolled out the Mosaics Club. And Jordan Garbarino, one of our English teachers, is the advisor, and he's been involved in some of our visits to Greece as well. And one of the other pieces to the Greece model is that they have a course, Mosaic's course, Literature of Diversity. And so as Jordan and the students, Mr. Garbarino and the students have been working together, they came to me and said, can we create a course around diversity and racial issues? And I'm just, one of the things in talking with the students, they're going to be using the lens of relevant literature to think critically and talk about issues related to discrimination and racial diversity. And it's just so exciting that we're going to be able to offer students this opportunity. So that is an English elective, and it will be offered to grades 10 through 12. And then Gender and Literary Texts, which is a SUPA course. And the way that SUPA courses work, the course is laid out, the curriculum is laid out, as well as the textbooks that align. And we have offered a gender and literature course in the past. And in recent years, the enrollment numbers have been very low. And the English department took a look at this the gender and literary text course from SUPA and said, hey, maybe this is the reboot, the makeover that our gender and literature course needs. So this is going to be offered as a senior elective.
And just as Dr. Maloney is so excited about Mosaics, I'm equally as excited that we will be able to offer the Reconnecting Youth course. It's a little unusual for us to have a class like this with credit, but we have a new Delphi counselor who she's certified in prevention and drug and alcohol counseling. And she has brought so many great ideas to us, and in her previous districts has taught this class. And what it is it's, we've always had this curriculum for students, but it's been through a group, a counseling group. Now kids can take this course for credit. And it's kind of considered an at-risk student. So a student who may not really like Penfield High School, a student who doesn't have great attendance, behind in credits, and considered at risk for graduation. Really oftentimes a lower GPA. And we've done a lot of reading on this course, and the goal is really to increase school performance, attendance, and kind of decrease drug involvement and some of the emotional stressors that kids have. It's a laid out curriculum that some other districts have started to offer for credit. And I'm just so excited that we're going to be able to, this is a course I don't know that students will come to us and want to sign up for, but it's a course that using through relationships that we have with kids, and some kids that really are considered at risk that struggle to get to school, a course that we can truly offer that may benefit them in terms of self-esteem, decision-making, personal control. So that is hopefully a class that we will be running next year as a half-year course, and we would like to run it both semesters. College prep math, this is going to be a fourth year option for students, seniors, to prepare students to study calculus in college that are not planning on going to a STEM-related field. So if you think more in terms of some of those social sciences, psychology, education, the students will be expected to continue with math, but maybe not at the applied mathematical and technical science level. So that would be another option for students who their fourth year here. And finally, building and repairing houses, too. This is exciting. This is a half-year technology elective that is going to dig deeper. We offer building and repairing houses 1, and there's a lot of students that love this class. It's those applied practical skills where kids learn about flooring and walling and roofing. But this is really going to dig deeper. It's a second year, and kids are going to actually start doing more plumbing, HVAC, siding, mason work, roofing through this class. Obviously, a little exposure to each, but again, some of those life skills that I know I wish I had, but because we know when we pay contractors that can be very expensive. And this is a great outlet for some students who really prefer to be hands-on rather than, the traditional note-taking and reading and textbook work. So those are the new courses that hopefully, pending your approval, we will be able to offer next year.
And there are a couple other changes that we wanted to highlight in the guide. Currently, we offer Insights into Chemistry and Physics as a full-year course. Moving forward, this will be split into 2 semester-long courses, which will now allow us to have 4 semester-long science electives: forensics, astronomy, and then insights into chemistry and insights into physics, which will allow students that ability to mix and match. Some students may pair forensics with insights into chemistry. Other students may elect to take insights into physics and then say, hey, I think next year I want to actually take physics. So it's going to allow students a little bit more flexibility. And then Super Sociology and the Mosaics course are going to be open to 10th through 12th graders. In the past, Super Sociology was 11th and 12th grade, and now we're going to open that up and allow for more elective choices for sophomores. And then the unpairing of the English and Social Studies paired courses. As you know, the Social Studies curriculum is currently undergoing significant restructuring with the shift to the new New York State learning standards for social studies. And with this shift, the Social Studies courses are more humanities focused. And teachers need time to do this work. As you know, with our transition over the years with different standards, it takes time to realign the courses to the new standards, as well as to collaborate with the English department for that humanities piece. And then the end result, social studies and English courses, K-12 are essentially going to be what we refer to now as paired with that humanities cohesion. But at the high school level, student schedules will not be locked down by needing to be paired with 2 particular teachers, with a particular English teacher and a particular social studies because of the paired course. So essentially all students will receive or experience that humanities cohesion of context fused with literature, not just the students in the honors or paired sections like it currently is. So students will be able to take English 9 honors, English 10 honors, English 11 honors, Global 1 honors, Global 2 honors, and AP US. In the example that we have there, in the current structure, if a student wanted to take Global 1 honors, they have to take the paired. But moving forward, students can take English 9 honors, but yet Global 1 honors, or English 9 honors and Global 1 honors, creating more options for students.
So we have actually begun this process. Last week, the teachers, core teachers, worked with students during classes to kind of talk about next year's selections in each subject area and kind of advise students on their thoughts and have converse with students about what they felt might be a good option and also listen to what students thought. Teachers added their feedback into Infinite Campus, and tomorrow the portal will open for all students and parents, high school grades 9, 10, and 11. And during the next 10 days, which begins tomorrow until right before the holiday break, students can add their input. They can look at what the teachers recommended. They can add their electives. They can add their input. We will close the portal right before the holiday break. And students at Bay Trail and parents will have that same opportunity in January 9th through the 17th. January 8th, we will offer a parent evening for Bay Trail parents so they can learn about transitioning to the high school. Then all students will meet with their school counselor here and look at their schedule, map out their plan, and we will then add all the input before February break. There will be a final opportunity to make changes. Letters and communications get sent home with outlines what students selected, and there will be a window to make changes. And then we'll have to lock Infinite Campus so we can begin work on building the master schedule, which we're excited about. We're learning some new tips and techniques to doing that this coming year, and some great training up ahead. And then we have a limited add and drop period for the first 2 weeks of school for students. We like students to try what they've selected, because obviously we've made decisions to hire teachers and offer certain classes based on course selection. So it's a process that we take. It takes a lot of time at the high school, but it also is why we're here to educate our students and have classes. So I believe that completes this portion, but we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Board members, any questions? John?
Naturally. I haven't seen this type of presentation before, so it's good. Thank you. I was pleasantly surprised to see how much feedback you considered from students, families, teachers to develop new courses and offerings, and I think the dual credit courses really help make Penfield unique, so thank you with that. And then I was equally as excited to see the building and repairing houses too, because that's an interest to me, and I, quite honestly, I think that'll get kids ready for life or a career should they not go to college. And as a homeowner, I think everybody needs to take part in that. We do need an Office 365 course for the board. I just learned that. But
Well, maybe next year the students could
Jim's
teach you
teaching
after
that.
they take it. I know.
But no, then lastly, I looked real quickly at that course guide. It was like 78 pages times 1,500 students. I mean, aside from Dr. Sansucci with dealing with moving targets, that's probably the biggest moving target to come and formulate a nice schedule that works in the beginning of the school year. So you guys should be proud of yourselves. So thanks.
Thanks, John.
Board members, any other questions or comments? Mark?
How's it going? A couple things. When you talked about moving some of these courses to every other year, which makes a lot of sense because we want to be able to offer them, and if they don't have sufficient demand, are any of these courses of the type that they need to be sequenced? So if you decide that if it's not offered this year, it prevents you from taking another course until you finish the first course. Do you have any of them that are sequenced that way, or can you take them independently of everything else?
Yeah, that's a great point.
That
We
is a great
definitely
question.
looked at the classes that we did decide to do that with, because we would hate to have a student take one this year and then not ever get it again or not get it till senior year. So we're only starting with 5 right now. So none of them are in that situation that you just described, the
sequence,
sequence. They are not.
And the other question I had was for the new courses, and I'll say Microsoft Office, I think, is great. That should be a mandatory compulsory for every student, in my opinion. However, all these, you're adding a bunch of new courses. How are you going to be evaluating their success in terms of that they're delivering the information you want them to deliver, and that there is sufficient demand, and that at the end of the first year, do people want to do this again?
I think with any course, whether it's a new course or a course that we currently offer, there's a layer. It's almost, if you think of it in terms of layers, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the students choose the courses, and that drives a lot of the offerings, but also, particularly with a course like the Microsoft Office course, some of the things that we look at is the majority of the students electing to take the dual credit? If they're not, then there must be a gap there. What's that gap? And that raises some red flags, and so we begin to look at that. Obviously the grades, the feedback from the teachers, and then the feedback from the students. The students are not afraid to tell us which courses are working and which courses are not working for them. But I really believe, particularly with the Microsoft Office course, because of the success that we've seen in the other districts that offer, I wouldn't be surprised if down the road I'm here presenting the advanced Microsoft Office course that many of the other schools offer.
Thank you.
Carol?
Thank you for the presentation.
Yes.
All right, so thanks. And it's exciting to see that you have a new book now, and and that it is online for us to see. I'm still thinking about the first time ever that we put a course guide online. I'm looking at Nancy, and that was so many years ago. So this is nice. I'm very excited about mosaics and gender and literary text, especially that those are classes that are offered a lot in colleges, and you see a lot of students, going to this, especially classes about women and women leaders and that kind of stuff. So this is really exciting. And I have a lot of appreciation for you for answering all my questions that came so late during the day. And I'm speechless that you answered them already. And I know I had numerous ones. So thank you so much. I frankly was not expecting an answer today. So I really appreciate that. And you answered them in great details. I still do have, I'm more a comment though about the reconnecting youth. I'm trying to wrap my head around it and, understand the need for it and why it's being presented. But I still have concerns regarding the stigma that might happen with such a class. And we've seen in other instances when a kid was placed in advanced classes like math, kids who would say, oh, they're in smart math, or we've heard from Ted Damon, our previous Delphi counselor, that sometimes kids didn't even want to come near his office in order for other kids not to think that, oh, why was so-and-so here? So what will you do for that?
A couple of things, and I think your concern is a very valid point. One of the things that I feel really good about is Katie DeSalvo, our new prevention counselor. So I'm not sure if the board is aware, but Ted Amon moved up at Delphi, so he is supervising Katie, and so that it always feels good to know that Ted is there, and he hand-selected Katie for PHS, and he did a fabulous job. Her experience and her background and having taught the course in two different districts, I feel, we're looking to her to say, we don't want to have this stigma. How do we avoid that? And what does that look like? And she's very excited because of the seminars and the relationships, as Steph mentioned, that our counselors have with our students, to be able to ensure that the students who are taking the course are the students who are going to benefit most from the course. And so far she's been great at providing us advice on how to avoid that stigma piece. And then in terms of the course and the connection that it has to the school, they do a lot of projects. She's had them do lots of projects in the past, and also projects within the community, volunteering and making those connections, reconnecting youth. So I'm very excited to have this course at PHS. I think.
And when I hear the description of the class when Mrs. DeSalvo talks about it, it almost reminds me of our leadership class in a different way. Our leadership class does projects for the school, and they get very invested, and they own a project, and it almost sounds like it mirrors that to some degree, and certain students would never go anywhere near a leadership class because they don't. They almost think there's a stigma with that. And I'm curious to see if we do get enrollment. As I'm sitting here, I know my 5 students I'm going to tap, and we could name them right here. And they're great kids. They're absolutely awesome kids, wonderful hearts, and just have gotten into tough situations. And, I know that there's good inside and that we can find that. And maybe it won't work, but I hope that it will work. It is different. I absolutely agree with you. But walking into the counseling office now and with our 9th and 10th grade seminars, I can't tell you how much of a different feel I have to be able to know every 9th grader in the building within 4 weeks of school starting by name. Every counselor can do that with their 9th and 10th graders now, and we're starting with 11th and 12th graders. And I've never felt such a connection, and it's exciting and it feels good. And we'll see what happens with Reconnecting Youth, and hopefully it will be successful.
Thank you. I appreciate your answers. My last one is to Dr. Putnam. So do we get some waiver from the state for having someone, I don't know, if I had asked if Katie was certified in education, and I'm not sure. If she's not, do we get some waiver from the state about that? Or am I?
This is when I turn to Barb Gregory. Barb.
I don't know the answer.
We don't know the answer. What we do know is that in working with Delphi with Ted Amon, is that other districts have done this, and we know that teachers can teach out one class out of their content area. It can't be a graduation requirement, but it can be a half a credit towards that. In the past, we've done similar things. We had a staff member who was a school psychologist who ran a yearbook club, but we offered credit for it, pass-fail credit, and we were able to do that as well. So the nice piece with that Delphi relationship is their connection with state ed as well, and so it's one of those pieces where it's pending board approval, and I will double check through BOCES with Dan White to make sure that what we are doing is allowable. Our understanding is it is, but we'll double check, because that was a great question that came up today.
Thank you. The Artist in Residence program here?
We have not had the artist in residence.
Well, we
Similar.
did that in a previous school district, and we had individuals who were not certified teachers, but were artists that taught that, and the students were able to earn credit for it. So I think that there's a way to do it. I just don't know off the top of my head.
The one thing I'll add, too, that I'm excited with the Reconnecting Youth is there's two things I think of. One is that through Ted Amon and now Mr. Salvo, there's already groups that meet, and so typically, and I haven't been in the high school in a few years, but is that they would get pulled out of class on a rotating basis to meet in group and have these conversations. So they missed instruction time, and we are typically talking about kids who aren't connected to school, and attendance is important. And you're asking kids to come in for group and have conversations and do a lot of this work, but they don't get credit for it. So here's an opportunity to say you're going to actually earn credit for coming here, but you've got to attend and you've got to be part of the class. So my hope is that can be that sort of the driving force to keep kids interested. The other piece with stigma, I think you're 100% right. Thinking about that is 4 years ago, as principal, I probably would have been worried about that. And I'm probably still worried, but I'm less worried because of the seminar structure we've talked about with the board, and how Katie DeSalvo, the counselors, the social worker, they're all going up and meeting with students.
I mean, we've brought in NAMI.
And so we have that, and then we have a lot of this, same with classes when we look at, where sometimes a class is really, really popular, and then due to retirements and teacher changes, it's a different teacher, and they might do a phenomenal job, but they just don't get the kids signing up for it, because a lot of times we know students connect to certain teachers and certain adults, and I know that they're connecting with, they connected with Ted, but in a different way they're connecting with Katie DeSalvo. So I'm excited. And then the other piece from a staffing point of view is we're not hiring for this. We have her here through the Delphi contract. So it's one of those, it's a win-win, because let's say we don't get enough kids to take the class. She's still a 1.0 staff member through the Delphi contract we have. So it's less of a concern than hiring a teacher to come in and teach the class and it doesn't work. So even around like the minimum 15, it's probably something we can look at a little bit differently, because she's already here, she's already in the building, she's already running group. And the other piece with the stigma I think of is these students, as both Steph and Leslie talked about, and I can pick some out, they already feel sometimes as an outsider at Penfield High School. I'm an honest person. We're a large traditional high school, so we are not everybody's favorite place to go. And so maybe having that stigma that they either self-impose or they feel that, to then connect with other people to feel that way and try to make a positive connection can hopefully be a real positive step. So I'm hopeful for that class and the others as well. I think I'm excited for. I will be signing up for building houses too, because the only job to do if you don't want to do any building is superintendent, because I don't have to build. I got Gary and Vic in the audience. So they do all the hard work for us.
Thank you. I appreciate your willingness to answer all my questions.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Lisa, did you have a question?
I did. I don't remember what it was. Oh, yes, I remember. Wait,
It's I can't tell.
It's red.
Is it red?
The red light has to be on.
I can't see. I gotta get my new glasses to work. Mine is more of a technical question. Actually, I actually had 2 questions, but when you're looking at locking down courses, you're locking Infinite Campus, and so kids can't make changes. What happens when, say, something's not offered? You know, how do parents and students, get notified, and then what does that look like for them?
So when we meet with students, we do always pick 2 magical alternatives. So we do let kids know that we can't always, it doesn't always fit like a perfect puzzle, and sometimes courses aren't offered, but if we can't go to an alternative, then we, all kids get notified that a class would be canceled and asked to pick something else. So,
Great.
yes.
And then I just was curious about the going to the every other year schedule. Is there a mechanism for students to kind of say, hey, I kind of wanted to take this year, so you can kind of gauge, like, gee, we got to put this one back in, or those kinds of pieces? Like a waiting list or something?
Oh, to keep a track of it?
Right.
When students meet with their counselor, those are the conversations that the counselor has, and their notes
Yeah.
are kept.
We keep a 4-year plan on a student, so we could, I would, if in my case, and everybody logs things a little different, but we do have a 4-year plan. So if we know they want to take our AP Art History and it's not going to be offered, we would make a note for senior year and, check in with the students. Sometimes they change their mind and sometimes they don't, and they remind us before we pull the note out. And but yeah, we definitely do have some checks and balances built in for that.
Great. Thank you.
Welcome.
Mark?
Yeah, I just want to go back to the Reconnecting Youth. As you describe us more, I had a question. How are we positioning this class along with the alternative school program that's in partnership with Gananda?
Yeah, actually, when we were talking about it, I was thinking of the G-Prep program. Currently, our students, we have a lot of 11th graders that have come back from G-Prep. 11th grade was not offered this year, and
At G-Prep.
At G-Prep. And so they're coming back, and some are doing a half-day BOCES program, and some aren't. And right now, I do see students from that program taking advantage that have returned to Penfield High School. I really see it as an option, too, for students that don't want to leave their home school. I think it's hard for some students, but I think to offer both, G-Prep is going to be more extensive and more alternative. They're going to, have smaller class environment. It's definitely more alternative, whereas this is going to be a half-year class one time. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I have a quick question. On the building houses, what I'm curious about is how many girls take that course, the one that you offer already? Do you have a sense? I'm hoping you're going to say 50-50.
You girls ever taken it? No. No,
You don't?
Unfortunately,
I don't
it's
know.
not.
It's not?
No, I would say, to be really transparent about it, maybe 10%. Yeah,
But I would need to run that to double check.
Yeah, we would have to double check it. I know currently the class running right now does not have a girl in it.
Uh-huh.
But there have been years there have been other females in it, and that's really power in numbers, right? Like a couple girls may decide they want to take that
But I just could see
That's a
that-
great point, yeah.
Yeah, I
Having,
mean, it would be just such a empowering thing to be able, because
to
that's...
pick up a tool and do
Yeah.
something, right?
Yeah, and not have to call a contractor or call your dad. You know, you move out into your first place or something, and something simple goes wrong, but you don't know how to fix it. you know?
Right, right.
So, yeah, I know if I was in high school, I'd be taking that course.
Well, in our new seminar structure tomorrow, we're going to be having these discussions. And I mean, it's something that maybe as we talk more with kids, rather than showing PowerPoints about what's to offer in groups of 100, you know, we're meeting in groups of 10. It's more of a conversation now and an encouragement to do that.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that comment, because sometimes you don't even think about that.
Right.
But,
Yeah, I think we can
thank
have a
you.
conversation tomorrow morning with the counselors.
Before they go into seminar.
Before
yeah.
they go into seminars to point that out.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have a snow day. Joking.
Well, I feel like I've done...
For the watching audience at home, do your homework.
Oh, sorry.
Get
That
a
was
good
a
night's
joke.
sleep. I did want to share, and I debated, but I wanted the board to know is that we do this presentation every year. I did it as principal, but there was always Andrea Weiss, who was really the creator. And Andrea Weiss, as you know, is a staff member who lost her battle with cancer. And because of that, it was difficult. And it's really kudos to Steph and Leslie, Teresa Niesel, and everybody else who stepped up and really had to do a lot of work, because, you know, we all get used to having someone do all the work and behind the scenes, and when that change happened, I know it's a lot. And the number of times I've been over to the high school where they're sequestered doing this and learning how to schedule, it's just a lot of work, so thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, John.
Just back on your question, you know, if you watch This Old House,
Or HGTV.
well,
I mean,
but in This Old House, they have an initiative this year called something like Generation Next or whatever, where they're getting post-high school kids into training, and it's basically 50-50 based on that number. And I read somewhere that, and maybe you see it on TV, but the fastest growing number of people getting into flipping houses are women.
Yeah.
Females, yeah.
Oh,
The
absolutely.
No doubt
design
about
and
it.
the.
And so I had the same question. I think
Yeah.
that it's something you have to really talk up. And
Absolutely.
I mean, you could watch that show
Break the
in
stigma.
class, because honestly, besides showing you how to do it, it's the why you do it. And that's part of the whole thing that I think people are afraid of, because it's not necessarily the pounding, it's the why behind it. So
Yeah.
it's something to think about for the counselors.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, I know that flipping is not an easy, they make it look so easy on TV, but if you know anything about it, you know it's not, and you have to have a lot of luck, but you do need skill. And this is something that, you know, it could open doors for a lot of people who may not think about a college career, but they want to
Sure.
make some money, and they want to be in charge of their career, and they want to be in charge of a
hands-on.
business or whatever. So, yeah, I think it would open some doors.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming tonight.
Yes,
Thank you for your
all for
presentation.
your positive feedback and your questions, and
Thank you.
it's an exciting
All right.
time.
Have a good night.
You too.
Go home and prepare for seminars tomorrow.
Okay.
All right. We will be here. That, that actually wraps up superintendent report. I know Claire has to leave because she's got a lot of work to do, so thank you so much, Claire.
Thank you, Claire.
And
Have
then
a nice
I'll
holiday.
turn it over to Dr. Sansucci.
Good evening. Have two presentations tonight. One of the final ones, actually, on the elementary additions project update, and then after that, our annual update as part of our ongoing budget process on status of reserves, the tax cap, fund balance, and so forth. So after that, we'll with the next meetings, kick off into the heart of the budget. But tonight's a fairly important night in terms of the long process that we've been going through with regard to a capital project. As you know, we've been at this for quite some time. It's taken some twists and turns as we've waited and changed and thought about what's going on in our community. But tonight in your agenda is the resolution that will authorize the date of the vote. So At the last couple of meetings, we've been through most of the seeker process. There's one more piece of seeker left to be done tonight. That's in your agenda. And then after that, it's after you complete seeker, the board's free to move forward with setting the vote, and we hope that we'll do that tonight. So just a brief, very brief update to remind you and the community where we're at with regard to the project, what's in it. Want to emphasize what's changed, because we've talked about this for a very long time, and it's taken a number of different forms as we've moved through. So we just want to make sure it's clear in everyone's mind what it is that we're proposing to undertake, and we just want to make sure that as we move forward tonight that we sort of have a clear vision of what it is that we're proposing. So 4 classrooms at each of Scribner, Cobbles, and Indian Landing. So 4 additions, 4 classroom additions at each of those buildings. At Scribner, we'll also be adding some ancillary space to accommodate growing enrollment. So that includes expansions of the gym, of a gym expansion, cafeteria, and at all the buildings you'll see changes to parking, drop-off, and so on. So that's true at Scribner. At Cobbles, in addition to the additions, there'll be changes to the cafeteria line. That cafeteria is internal to the building, so it's not being expanded. But there are also extensive changes to parking and parent drop-off. At Indian Landing, the cafeteria expansion in the back of the building, changes to create a parent drop-off loop immediately behind that cafeteria, and changes in front of the building to the bus loop to provide a safer and better situation for parents and buses dropping off. That's changed a bit, and I just want to point this out one last time. We won't talk about what's changed after tonight, but we've only had one previous look at what's been different. So as a result of our final scope review and numerous meetings that Dr. Putnam led in the elementaries, we've made a few changes to the scope that we've talked about previously. So at Scribner, pretty much everything that we've talked about all along is there. The cafeteria expansion is there, but there's been some modifications from the original, mostly in terms of outside seating area and so on. But the cafeteria is still included, an expansion of the cafeteria. That's one of the smallest cafeterias in our district with the largest enrollment. It needs the additional space. But we tweaked around the edges a little bit of what that space would look like. Cobbles, the renovations at the cafeteria service line are still included. We did remove, however, from the scope the gym addition and the loading dock. The existing gym, we feel, is adequate for the capacity of that building, and the loading dock we elected to remove because it's for one thing, it's going to be non-aidable, and for another reason is that it's really at a crucial point of the building in terms of utilities coming into the building, and we worried about the expense of that. So it's been removed, and no changes really at Indian Landing. While the cafeteria expansions were not aidable after our SED review, we've elected to include it at both Scribner and Indian Landing because of the need. I won't go through these in detail other than to point out that they differ slightly. You can look at these online if you have, and they are online already if you have the interest, but they're changed just very slightly to reflect those changes that I just discussed. Scribner's site plan, no real changes there. You can see here at the Cobbles classroom, previously we showed the gym addition. Now we show the 4 classroom addition alone. Again, changes to the site plan only to reflect the elimination of the gym space. Indian Landing classrooms, this has not changed from the previous versions that you've already looked at, nor has the Indian Landing site plan. So that's consistent with what you've seen all along. The other important part of this project has to do with buildings and grounds, so the and transportation. So we will be included in this project is the purchase of an 11-acre parcel at 1364 Jackson Road. We intend to build on that parcel a shared facility with, for transportation and buildings and grounds, moving the transportation function off of 5 Mile Line and out to that site. Again, that'll also be shared with the buildings and grounds staff. So we'll be moving most of our activity out of 5 Mile Line and out to Jackson Road. There still will remain some work there. We intend to maintain at 5 Mile Line Road. We'll do some renovation to the existing bus garage to turn it into a bus wash, and also a network operating center. We intend, I think we will always maintain some buses at 5 Mile Line Road, route out of there, rather than all out of Jackson Road, but that use at that site will be greatly reduced. The red bounding box shows the site at the corner of Jackson and Plank Road. I think we all know it as a portion of the Berry Turkey Farm. This is a schematic of what the facility would look like on that site, and a more detailed drawing of what the internals of that facility would look like. This is the 5 Mile Line Road site. The two white boxes are not being touched at all in this project. That's a pole barn and the existing office building. The blue box that is the existing maintenance facility for the buses will be partially renovated. The top here you can see is sort of the existing big open space that it is right now for a bus garage. It'll be split up a little bit to be turned into a waiting room, as we'll be routing out of there a bus wash, and the network operating center in green. And finally, there is in this project a little bit of scope for the building for Bay Trail and High School in terms of renovation and repair work that was identified in the building condition survey. In the last meeting, we added to this scope the replacement of the existing chiller plant at the high school. As you know, that's currently out of operation. It is past its end of useful life, and so we added it to this as the most expeditious and cost-effective way to be able to address that. With all the changes, and you've seen different budgets as we've moved along, we are at a total estimated budget of $42,300,000. So that's what our proposition will propose. So this is you have in your packet a much longer version of this with all of the required legal language. This is already too long for a slide, but I just really wanted you to be able to see sort of those three key points. A total budget, a total estimated authorization, not estimated, a total authorization based on our estimated budget of $42,310,000. So that's the amount we may not spend more than. We are proposing that of that we will use $17 million from our capital reserves, and we will have authority to borrow up to $25,310,000, the balance of the balance of the cost of the project. Here again are those three key assumptions: the $42 million, $310 voter authorization, the money from reserves, and just a reminder that the state of New York shares in the cost of these projects. So about 74% of this project, of the eligible expenses of the project, not of every dollar spent, but of the eligible expenses, is aided for us at about 74%. This is the timing in part of this project. We've been working towards it for some years because we know the changes that are coming to us as a result of the refinancing of our outstanding debt. It's going to create additional state aid as we move forward. We reduced our expenses. The state aid is tied to is somewhat independent of that at this point. So we'll have an increase in state aid into the district. We're using that in part to offset some of the expenses of this project. So our goal here is to maintain the positive cash flow, the flow of cash over the expenses. So the state aid to our district, in comparison to our expenses for debt service, is right now positive by about $1.5 million. We receive every year, because of cash projects that we've done in the past, about $1.5 million in state aid more than we spend in debt service. We'd like we'd like to manage that, not allow that to grow because it creates a problem in future budgets, but also take advantage of that opportunity. So this is the current plan for financing of that potential debt, the $25 million in debt. And as you can see, what it does is it levels that positive cash flow out into the future, pushes it out a number of years, and allows us to continue on in that stable environment. In terms of the timeline, we've looked at this at lots of meetings as things have turned blue as we've moved along. Tonight at December 12th, we'll schedule the vote date. The tentative date in your packet is February 13th. In between then and now, we're in the process right now of discussing and scheduling a public meeting. We'll want to have one more big public meeting to explain this to our taxpayers. And Nancy, we picked a date, but it's just went through February 5th. Thank you. We'll be finalizing that and making that known. We're in the process now, or we've begun the process of the newsletter that'll inform folks about this and provide them additional information. We'll have that public hearing, and then again the vote on February 13th. Assuming that the vote's positive, this is, we wanted to provide some information on a tentative timeline. So we'll split it up. This will probably be submitted at least in 2 different packages to SED for approval. But we would include the chiller work because it's fairly modest, and because there's some interest in getting that done fairly quickly as a repair. We'd be submitting that very quickly after the vote. We'd anticipate an SED review between March and November of 2018. If that's true, we would be able to bid and award at the end of the 18-19 school year, and then over the course of the summer of 19, complete the required construction, so that as we come back to school for the 19-20 school year, that plant would be back into operation. The remainder of the work could look like this. So again, we need to we're moving out of the planning stage, we're moving out of the design of a project stage, and we'll begin moving into actual design of the project. Some phasing work, we'll have to decide what we build and when, but tentatively this is what one schedule could look like. So March through October of 18 would be design, the actual completion of the drawings, the engineering and the architectural work for a submission to SED by November of 2018. We estimate at the current schedule that work would be at SED for review between November of 18 and September of 19. Once we receive approval from SED, which is our building permit, once we have the necessary building permit, we can bid and award contracts and then begin construction perhaps in mid 2019, so December of 19. And construction would continue for the entire project through a 3-year period, August of 20, hard to say that even, 2022. So we're, it's a long process, but there's certainly a lot of work to be done. And we want to give people a sense of that as they go towards the polls. So with that was fairly quick, I think, and a bit of a 10,000-foot overview, but I know you've been through it before, and much of it in greater detail than this. So are there any questions?
Board members? No. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much. So with that, then, I would like to talk a little bit about our fiscal stress, our budget forecast reserves, and budget forecast reserves. And I'd also like to thank Vic and Gary for showing up on a snowy night when you didn't have to. I appreciate it.
We appreciate that very much.
Yes, thank you very much for coming. Kevin, thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to I have lots of information here. I know you have the extract of the PowerPoint, which goes on for a great number of slides. I'm not going to go through much of it in detail. It's here for your information, as is the much more complete package that you received as part of your budget package. But I just want to talk about some of the highlights of this and review for the board really what it all means as we move forward into this budget process, which is the sort of the key part of this. So we begin our conversation, we always begin our conversation where the comptroller begins, which is a discussion of fiscal stress. So the comptroller instituted this fiscal stress analysis or monitoring project with really as a result of the tax cap and as a result of sort of the problems that school districts have begun to have as they struggle with life in that environment. So, you know, an analysis of our budget condition and where we're going sort of should begin with where you're at and what you're facing. And so we talk about, so we begin our conversation with, well, how are we? Are we financially healthy? Are we under stress? And I've pointed out in the past that it's really, you know, we all have health. It might be good or it might be not so good, but we all have it. And that's sort of true of fiscal health as well. It's a continuum, and we move along that continuum for better or worse as we move along. So in terms of fiscal stress, the components of what it looks like essentially are you solvent? Can you pay your bills? Do you have cash solvency? Are you good for 30 or 60 days? Do your revenues equal your expenditures? Do you, long-run solvency is, can you meet your obligations out into the future? And for us, you know, these are all possible sort of academic definitions of fiscal stress or of solvency. But for us, what we really care about is is service level solvency. What our taxpayers care about, what we care about as a board and about school administrators, are can we continue to provide what we provide? Can we continue to provide the level and quality of services that our communities come to expect? And the comptroller proposes to help us in that analysis with his monitoring system. So they provide 7 financial indicators, 6 environmental indicators. They're not perfect. They're not perhaps even the best. But they were selected by the comptroller because it's data that he can get fairly easily, and they say something about the condition of the school district. So I won't go through these. There's more information about them in your packet, but I'll just touch on what they are, and you can see, because I've graphed them, about where we are in Penfield. So change in property value, if your property value over time is declining, it probably says something about the health of your school district. Our property values have increased, and you can see in Monroe County at least, we're about in the middle of the pack. Change in enrollment. This is a multi-year change in enrollment. Enrollments across all of Monroe County have decreased. You know, this is a trailing average. I'll speak more to that in a little bit, but it's from 12 through 16. We know tonight that our enrollments are increasing at the elementary levels. And in fact, you can see here that overall we lost, during that period of time, amongst the least of all districts in Monroe County. Budget approval percentages, we routinely pass our budget at the 60% level. That hasn't changed really over the course of the last 3 years. Our graduation rate is amongst the 3 highest in the county, and we have a very low rate of free and reduced lunch of students in the free and reduced lunch program. So you can sort of intuitively guess, I think, the answer from those environmental factors that the comptroller would not project us to be in fiscal stress. In terms of the financial indicators, that story pretty much carries over. Assigned fund balance over expenditures, so this is how much of your budget are you appropriating in essentially one-shot revenue. And as you can see, we're a little bit above the average for the county, but pretty close to the middle of the pack. Total fund balance over expenditures were high, but we've been building up to tonight's capital project, with your adoption tonight of the resolution for tonight's capital project, 17 million comes out of that total fund balance. We fall back well into the middle of the pack, and we'll begin again building towards our next project. Operating deficits, again, not a concern for us. Cash as a percentage of short-term cash and short-term investments as a percentage over liabilities, again, while we're certainly not the highest, we're in about the middle of the pack. And cash as a percentage of monthly expenditures, again, in the middle of the pack. So I think it shouldn't be a surprise to you, based on the comptroller's report then, that we are not in fiscal stress. Our score for fiscal stress for the upcoming year we estimate to be at about 6%, environmental 0, and the comptroller doesn't consider us in stress until we hit 25%. So not in stress, nothing to worry about, right? The thing about that whole system, though, is that it's a trailing system. It looks backwards. By the time you're borrowing money, for example, one of the two of the indicators that I don't even include, because we don't borrow on a short-term basis for cash flow. But I think that's a good example. Once you're borrowing on a short-term basis for cash flow, all of your other indicators are probably bad. You'll be in fiscal stress, but it's sort of too late. It's sort of the driving off of a cliff analogy. Your wheels are in the air and they tell you you've got a problem. So the idea is that you should be looking forward rather than backwards. Backwards informs us. It tells us how we're doing. It tells us what the comptroller has to say about us, but it doesn't really inform our future. And we have that eye on service level solvency. Can we continue to do this into the future? And that has a lot to do with decisions that the board makes and that we make as we move forward into a budget. So about 75% of our budget is salary and benefits. Everything else composes only about a quarter. In terms of the revenue side of our budget, 65% of our budget is provided to us by the taxpayers, and that's capped. 27% of our budget comes to us in the form of state aid. So all the other stuff that we spend lots of time worrying about and talking about really only composes 8% of our budget. 65% of our budget capped by that tax cap. While it's not really a cap, we can exceed it. It's exceedingly difficult to do so. So, there's some challenges there. And state aid's out of our hands. We can advocate along with our peers, but really the decisions that are made and the money that's available really isn't something that's within our control. I always look back to history with regard to that. Those two slides are not any different than they ever have been. We've never, we're a service organization. Schools are about teachers in front of kids, and that's people. So, we'll always be, the majority of our budget will always be staff. And those other factors, Penfield's, a school district like Penfield will always have the majority of its money come from the taxpayers. So that's not different. And so a little bit of history, I think, provides perspective where we've managed for 10 years now, for a decade. We were a tax cap district before there was a tax cap. We had some higher years, certainly, historically, but we've managed through a very long process to maintain within a 1.8% 10-year average. That's on the levy, and you can see the rate actually a bit less than that and negative in some years, depending on growth of property in the community. So I think we've done a good job. So what about this year? As we look forward, we've talked about fiscal stress. We've talked a little bit about budget and the pressures that's going to put on our budget as we move forward. We know tonight what we didn't know the last time we talked about this, one additional factor for the tax base growth, which is the amount of growth in our community of real bricks and mortar property. So about half of 1%. So we've had some bigger years, but this is a more typical year for us. And this is what it looks like when you compare it to the county. So certainly, Webster, Spencerport, Fairport growing. If I included Victor on this, they're blowing up in terms of, the increase of assessed valuation. But for us, a more typical year and about close to the average for the county. So we look at, so with those concerns, we try and look at where we're at with regard to a forecast of budget as we move into the future. So I've included, in terms of forecast, what you build on, and I've forecast state aid increasing at 3% per year into the future, no changes in debt service. There will be huge changes in debt service as we move forward, but I'm assuming that they'll be offset by state aid increases. Our whole plan is to try and keep that at $1.5 million positive. So if they both change proportionally, it shouldn't affect our forecast. I assume a little bit of flattening of TRS and ERS, but I do assume that it increases steadily into the future. We don't know that that's true, but that's the assumption we make here. And I assume that we always are at a maximum tax cap. And if I do that, you can see we pop up in the near future in terms of budget surplus because we've been putting money aside in past years for capital projects. I don't propose that continues in the forecast. It will, it should. But what this really shows is that march downward, that ever never-ending march downward of budget surplus as we move forward. And really, that's not a promise. Really, that's just a reminder that the decisions that we're making as we move forward sort of compound. So 65% of our budget, or I'm sorry, 75% of our budget in terms of salaries and benefits, health insurance, for example, increasing at 10%, which is what I include in the forecast, salaries increasing, and those leveraging against, in my forecast, increasing costs of ERS and TRS are going to be a strain for our budget as we move into the future. We're okay, I think, is what this tells us in the short term. We are well reserved. Our budget is stable. Our budget is in a good spot, and we are in a spot to be able to maintain our programs and our services. This shows for 5 years. Based on this set of assumptions. Lots can change. We keep updating this. We look at this every year. We push it out. We've pushed it out further into the future. We've been more concerned. But just the idea is that we know, if we look backwards, we know we're fiscally stable. If we look forwards, we know that we're that we are okay in the near future. But I think then always I want to just remind the board and ring that warning bell a little bit that the decisions that we make now are going to have impacts into the future. But in the meantime, our budgeting process, the conservative budgeting process that we've always used, generates a surplus. I go through in your packet, and there's some more discussion of this in the actual packet. You also have access, of course, to the PowerPoint, but a little discussion about what those surpluses have historically been and how they've been managed. And here you can see, as we've moved throughout the year, the differences are fairly small. The actual total amount of the surplus is a percentage of budget, not a lot. In fact, over the course of the last 6 years, just about 2%. It's been 3, 2, 2, popped up a bit last year. We've been aiming for a budget surplus just on the expense side of 5%. We've been trending at around 6, and last year we popped up a little bit. So we'll need to attend to that as we move forward into this budget process. I think over the course of the next couple of years, actually, on the expense side at least, that's going to solve itself as we move into what I'm forecasting to be much more difficult times. In terms of that recommended target for variance, I said we were aiming for 5. We've been at 6 and 7. The state guideline or the state law there's no law for schools. There's no guideline. There's no comptrollers suggested. There's nothing. But for towns, there's 10%. our auditor would always say it's proportional to fund balance, which is why I got a question about, why do we include appropriated fund balance in a reserve report? It's not a reserve. And of course it's not, but the more you appropriate, really, the more you need, because the looser a budget you need, actually, because you need to be able to manage that. You need to be able to manage that revenue source on that side of your budget. So we're at about 2%. So that would indicate that we should be probably at a low of 2.5 to perhaps 5. We're targeting 5. And we'll continue to monitor that as we move into future years. Spent a little bit of time comparing in both the document and in this PowerPoint our reserves, our philosophy around reserves. The comptroller suggests that we talk about this, and comparing our philosophy for this, really, with what the comptroller guidance would offer. And I won't read this, certainly there's lots here, but essentially we line up with the comptroller's philosophy. Reserves are necessary. He would agree with that. Reserves need to be managed. We need to be thoughtful about how we establish them and how we use them. Tonight's a great example of that. We're managing our budget for many, many, many years into the future, an important component of our budget, and in part using reserves, using capital projects to do necessary work, and also to be able to manage that out into the future. So we go through an inventory. You have an inventory of the reserves that we have, when we've established them and for what purposes. We have a capital bus reserve, a capital reserve for bus purchase, I should say, a capital reserve, insurance reserve, unemployment insurance reserve, a workers' comp, tax certiorari, a small employee benefits reserve, and a retirement contribution reserve. In your packet is a balance sheet showing the ins and outs during the course of the last year, where we were, what we used, what we put in, the interest earned on each of them. So here you can see that for the restricted fund balances, we used reserves from bus purchase and from employees' retirement. We increased a reserve to capital. Tonight we're proposing to spend much of that. We took $2 million out of our debt service fund in order to refinance debt. Again, part of that long-range plan that we're going to be reaping the reward of in the next couple of years. And finally, unassigned fund balances, where we're at in terms of assigned and unassigned fund balances, unassigned being the 4% and assigned being the what we appropriate for reduction of taxes, so about $2 million per year. This is what that pie looks like overall in terms of our total reserve picture. You can see that about 65% of our reserves are for capital, and the remainder of the reserves are for their stated purposes. And finally, I'll close with just a series of recommendations where we're at in terms of reserves. Our unemployment reserve is very small. It's really only adequate for about 13 people for 1 year. So rather than use it on an annual basis, we maintain it against spikes. So in years when we have more people on an unemployment than less, we can use it to buffer those changes. Employee benefit accrued liability, this is really not available for use on an ongoing basis. It's maintained for one of our units that has a benefit in retirement. So sick days convert if in this group and become available. So we adjust it. It's about $70,000 in total. We adjust it at year end. Tax certiorari is going to be important this year. This is for a reserve for claims made against the school district for commercial properties that claim to be overassessed. We've been We try to maintain that about at about 50% to 75% of the outstanding claims. We've paid off over the course of the last year several successful claims as they've gone through the court process, and we haven't added anything to it in a number of years, so we should look at the funding level of that as we move forward. We're currently at about 44% of the outstanding cases. So as we move forward into the next funding cycle, we should think about whether that balance is adequate. Workers' compensation, we'd appropriated a $500,000 out of that reserve into this year as a revenue into this year, so we should, this recommends that we consider that as we move through this budget cycle and either reappropriate it into next year if it's not necessary, or potentially use it, transfer that funds into those funds if they are finally available into a capital reserve to begin refunding capital reserves. After tonight, we will be down to approximately $800,000 in capital reserve, and we'll need to begin the process over the next many years of accumulating funds for our next project, which will come faster than we think. I can't believe that we've come this far. Bus purchase reserve, we talk about this every year. We buy all of our buses every year through a combination of money from reserve and a combination of money budgeted into the budget. That allows us to avoid spikes in the budget. In years when we have relatively more buses to be purchased, we can use the reserve to buffer that impact. Retirement contribution reserve. Again, this is maintained for spikes in the employees' retirement contribution. We've used $250,000 in 16-17. $100,000 was brought into this year. We should continue. As this year's budget cycle moves on, we'll make a determination as to the appropriate level, and we'll review those balances at year end as to what makes sense. And finally, debt service fund. This is down about where it needs to be. We'll want to maintain some of that as we move through the course of this next project. But we started at $6 million. We took $2 million out for the refinancing. We will use $2 million for financing against the debt that we'll be issuing for this project, which will leave about $2 million in the reserve. So that's been spent down fairly steeply over the course of the last few years. It builds up. Source of funds for that is actually interest earnings on monies held as you go through a project. So it'll start to creep back up as we go through the next project. Insurance reserve we reduced by $1.5 million last year. There's approximately $500,000 left in it now, which is the balance that our insurance agent suggests we maintain. So we'll maintain that, take a look at the balance, and take a look at outstanding claims at year end to make sure that we're adequately funded. And finally, capital. Again, total reserves in capital, you saw this on the pie chart, 17.8. 17 will be used for the additions project. We'll be down to about $800,000 in that reserve. So we'll begin to move forward. We'll need to think about, as we move forward, refunding that reserve and building and sort of beginning that long process of building it up as we move forward to be able to balance a future capital project. Oops. So that was that. I know there's an awful lot there, but I went through fairly quickly, but I wanted to be conscious of your time and of the weather. So is there any, are there any questions? Is there anything I went through too quickly or that I could go through in more detail? I'd be happy to answer.
Board members? John?
This wasn't so much on that, but, every year looking at the certiorari list.
Yes.
I mean, every year Popeyes just keeps,
yeah,
it's coming every year.
It's still on there.
It's still, yeah.
Yeah, and although there is it took me a long time to figure this out, but there is a rhythm to that. So for those commercial vendors or commercial entities like Popeyes, it costs them really very little to file the tax certiorari petition, and that sort of holds their place. But to go forward and to go to court and to do the work that is required to get potentially the tax reduction, they need to pay an attorney, they might need to get an appraisal, a commercial appraisal, and there's a cost to that. So what they tend to do is file, and then when they get enough in the pile, 5 years worth seems to be fairly typical, then when you spend for the appraisal and then when you go to court, you're getting a bigger bang for your buck. If you go to court and have to do an appraisal for 1 year worth of tax reduction, it's not nearly as cool as if you can go and get a, and get 5 years worth of tax reduction for the same money. So I expect there's a number of cases on our that spreadsheet that have 4 or 5 years at controversy right now. So I'd expect to see, I think in the next year or so, they'll start to go forward.
And the other one, which I'm sure you might not know the answer, but the Penwood Apartments.
Yes,
I mean, they're
one
claiming-
just settled.
they
If
did.
you'll remember, in this year, they had a couple of years outstanding, and 2 of those years we just refunded for. There was a settlement, but they'd already filed for last year, and that's still at controversy. So and if things go the way they do, I typically get these in August, right after the rolls filed, the rolls finalized. So I'd expect to see them do it again, build up a couple years, and then go back.
Yeah, it just seems like their assessment, they're claiming is like $3 million less than what the town believes it is. So
Right.
I wonder if something happened there, or they were just crazy.
Sometimes it sort of depends on, some of the attorneys are very aggressive about what I think there's no harm in an ask, you know what I mean? So you'll see a $10 million property and that court paperwork will be, and we think it should be assessed at $500,000. It's clearly not reasonable, but it drives a stake in the ground, I think, for the conversation.
Okay, thanks.
Mark?
And it may have been said, and I know Mark would say this, the important thing that for people to understand is this is between the property owner and the town. We're just bystanders.
Exactly. We, depending on the size of the claim and the nature of it, we can intervene. That is, we file paperwork with the court saying we're an interested party in this, and we want to be able to, and we want to be notified, and we want to be part of any settlement. But that doesn't that holds a seat at the table for us, if you will. Really, those negotiations are between the town assessor, and the entity, and we sort of take that back seat. It allows us to make sure we know what's going on. But if we disagree with the settlement, we can't stop it. What we can do then is take our own attorney, we can intervene, go back to, we've never done that. I mean, that's not our expertise. That's not, we do what we need to do to make sure that we're as involved as we can be, but it's not our fight, really. We don't have that. It's not our role.
Any other questions or comments? Oh, that was quite a bit. We always appreciate all the work that you do. You do a lot, you do it well, and it's just a good time of year to say thanks.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate what you do, and we appreciate the information you share.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.
That concludes superintendent reports for the evening.
All right. Okay, board members, we're on page 3 of our agenda. Seeker Resolution Building Condition Survey 2018 Elementary Schools Addition Project. In the past, the State Education Department acted as lead agency and was responsible for making the determination regarding the potential environmental impact of school district construction projects. The state has shifted this responsibility to the local district. In this case, the district will be requesting voter approval of the 2018 Elementary Schools Additions Project, which may include but not limited to, addressing the following conditions identified in the Building Conditions Survey for the Penfield High School and Bay Trail Middle School as presented tonight and shown on the agenda. If you go to page 5, we'll pick it up there. Based upon the review by the Board of Education of the work identified in the Building Conditions Survey, the Board hereby declares itself lead agency to the extent necessary for this purpose, and hereby finds that the proposed action constitutes a Type 2 action as defined in seeker regulations, and therefore is not subject to any further review by the school district under seeker. The action consists of routine activities of an educational institution as well as replacement, rehabilitation, upgrades, or reconstruction of a structure or facility in kind on the same site, pursuant to 6 NYCRR Section 617.5 C 1, 2, and 8. May I have a motion and a second? Sharon will read the roll call for vote.
Second.
Any questions or comments? Okay, Sharon.
Mrs. Babiars?
Aye.
Mrs. Benatti-Cincy?
Aye.
Mrs. Dean?
Aye.
Mr. Elledge?
Aye.
Mrs. Nazarov?
Aye.
Mr. Otney?
Aye.
Mr. Piper?
Aye.
7-0, motion carries.
Okay. Vote proposition. Be it resolved by the Board of Education as follows. A special meeting of the qualified voters of the Penfield School District shall be held at Penfield High School in room A1, Penfield, New York, on Tuesday, February 13, 2017. Is that 2018?
Oh, yeah.
2018. Between the hours of 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. for the purpose of voting on the proposition described in the notice of special meeting hereinafter set forth. Said special meeting shall be called by giving the following notice thereof. The full proposition appears on tonight's agenda. I will read the abbreviated proposition that will appear on the ballots, which begins on page 7 of your agenda. Notice is hereby further given that the text of the aforesaid proposition may appear on the ballot labels in the following abbreviated form. Proposition. Shall the proposition set forth in the legal notice of this special voter meeting authorizing the acquisition by the Penfield Central School District of approximately 11 acres of land located at 1364 Jackson Road in the town of Penfield and the construction of a shared transportation buildings and grounds facility thereon, and the construction of additions to and construction, reconstruction, and equipping of school buildings and facilities, including various site improvements, all at an estimated maximum aggregate cost of $42,310,000, with the expenditure of $17 million from the existing capital reserve funds for such costs. The issuance of not to exceed $25,310,000 of debt obligations of the school district therefore, and the levy of a tax and annual installments therefore, with such tax to be partially offset by state aid available therefore. All as more fully described in said notice be approved. The school district acting as lead agency under the State Environmental Quality Review Act and the applicable regulations promulgated thereunder, known as SEEKR, has completed its environmental review and on November 28, 2017, duly issued a negative declaration and determined and found a portion of the proposition to be a Type 1 action which will not result in any significant adverse environmental impacts. And on December 12, 2017, duly determined and found a portion of the proposition to be a Type 2 action which will not have a significant impact on the environment and is not subject to any further environmental review under SEEKR. And notice is also given that applications for absentee ballots to vote on the proposition may be applied for at the office of the school district clerk. Any such application must be received by the district clerk at least 7 days before the date of the aforesaid special district meeting if the ballot is to be mailed to the voter, or the day before such special district meeting if the ballot is to be delivered personally to the voter. A list of all persons to whom absentee ballots shall have been issued shall be available for public inspection in the office of the district clerk during regular office hours on each of the 5 days prior to the day of the vote, excluding Saturday and Sunday. An absentee ballot must reach the office of the district clerk not later than 5:00 p.m. on the day of such special district meeting. All right. At such meeting, taxes to be levied by installments will be proposed, providing for payment of such capital costs and providing for the financing costs therefor. Such taxes shall be levied upon all the taxable property of the district, shall be levied in annual installments, and shall be of such amounts and levied in such years as may be determined by the Board of Education. The district clerk or the clerk's designee is hereby directed to publish a copy of said notice of special meeting in 2 newspapers having general circulation within the school district in the manner prescribed by law for publication of notice of the annual meeting of the school district. All actions by the school district prior to the final environmental determinations by the Board of Education, if any, are hereby found and determined to have been preliminary planning activities under seeker necessary to the formulation of a proposal for action which did not commit the school district to commence, engage in, fund, or approve any portion of the proposed capital improvements project and financing therefor. This resolution shall take effect immediately upon its adoption. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Duly put, yes.
But before we have the motion and the second. If I could ask, before we move forward with the vote, what I'd like to do as a matter of formality is correct the agenda. So if we could get, if you could ask please for a motion and a second to amend the motion to correct the 2 dates. There are 2 dates in paragraph 1 on page 6 and in paragraph 2 on page 6. In both cases, it says February 13th, 2017. So to correct both of those to February 13th, 2018. Thank
I'll
you.
move that amendment.
I'll second it.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, duly put to a vote as follows when you're ready, Sharon. Sharon will read roll call for vote.
Mrs. Babiars?
Aye.
Mrs. Benatti Chidsey? Aye. Mrs. Dean?
Aye.
Mr. Elledge?
Aye.
Mrs. Nazaro?
Aye.
Mr. Otney?
Aye.
And Mr. Piper?
Aye.
7-0, motion carries.
Okay. All right, under financial items, approval of annual report, reserve funding and use. Board policy number 5630 requires that the Board of Education conduct an annual review of all reserve funds. In addition to this required review, this information is also included as part of the annual budget presentations during the budget process. Regular review of this important aspect of the district's finances is intended to ensure transparency of the process and to assist the board in making the necessary decisions to adequately fund all reserves, manage the fund balance, and ensure the overall budgetary integrity of the school district. This report, updated December 12, 2017, has been submitted for board review. May I have a motion, please, in a second, that the Board of Education hereby approve the annual reserve plan and the presented recommendations, and directs that the recommendations for reserve use be incorporated into the 2018-19 budget planning process.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
None opposed. Thank you. All right, policy review.
Sure. This is second reading and approval for a new policy around food service program, as well as some edits to our school food service program, and then a list of policies that we're really just cleaning up language, but no major changes to those policies. So there have been no changes since first read and no additional public comment.
Okay. May I have a motion, please, in a second, that the above policies be approved as presented?
So moved.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed. Thank you. Medicaid Compliance Plan Certification and Approval. Penfield's Medicaid Compliance Program must be certified annually by December 31st. The board has reviewed the compliance program self-assessment tool developed by the Office of the Medicaid Inspector General. The document has been reviewed by the District Medicaid Compliance Committee, and no substantive changes have been made from prior years. Approval is recommended. May I have a motion and a second that the board recertify the Medicaid compliance plan as presented above?
So moved.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed. Thank you. Approval of PHS course description guide. May I have a motion and a second that the 2018-19 Penfield High School course description guide be approved as presented above?
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed. Thank you. Okay. Couple of remarks. We did our school tour of Cobbles and Buildings and Grounds this past Friday. It was a beautiful day. We were outside for a while over at Buildings and Grounds. It's very interesting to see how they work over at Buildings and Grounds. It's very cramped, very crowded, but they're very ingenious.
Well, actually, that was transportation.
Yes.
But,
Yes, thank you.
I mean, but so's building and grounds, but to see them all squished into that room.
I know, it was interesting. We were there when they were all coming to work for the afternoon shift, and yeah, it was quite something.
And as they pointed out at our last meeting, with the additional training requirements, there's nowhere to put them, so it's
Exactly.
it's tough.
Yeah, for sure. But it was very enlightening. We saw over at Cobbles where, if approved, the new addition would go, and that's very interesting. And it was good. It was enjoyable and informative. Very much enjoyed it and appreciated it. And then we have the next one coming up Friday at Indian Landing and at Scribner. So we're looking forward to that, assuming, we're not snowed in or anything. All right.
Yeah.
There's no unfinished business and no new business. So with that, may I have a motion and a second that the meeting be adjourned at 8:55 p.m.?
So moved.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed. Thank you.